staying on institutional trust, that's a cornerstone of what it means for England and then Britain to have a monarchy. So that's a very interesting question, and one that the answer will unfold before us and indeed through the generations long beyond our time here. Which other institutions are currently low in trust, and what is it that you think needs to be done to rebuild the trust? Why have they reached such a nadir, and how do they get out of it?
Well, I think I can't actually think of many institutions that have kind of maintained their prestige beyond a relatively narrow belt. I think most traditional institutions are struggling because there's a very strong disconnect, I think, between whatever you want to call them, the intelligentsia, the chattering classes, whatever cliche you want to pick. The people who tend to staff institutions are disassociated from what you call sort of patriotic, normal, mainstream views in a way that I don't think has ever happened before. So if you think of something like the Church of England, now I used to be a member of the Church of England and I'm not anymore, so I'm quite careful in how I talk about the Church of England. But the Church of England has traditionally been, to put it simply, is a kind of chaplaincy to the establishment, which has worked very, very well as long as the establishment is broadly Christian and broadly sort of in tune with what the church is seeking to do. And the kind of people from whom Anglican clergy are drawn, again, they're sort of mainstream, middle-class, intelligent people. And what you've got now is that those people aren't conservatives anymore, or mostly aren't conservatives anymore. If I think back to the people I went to university with, almost none of them are conservatives. Even people who've gone into the professions, people who 40 or 50 years ago would definitely have been conservatives, are not now. So I think a lot of institutions are staffed by people who have come through the universities in the last sort of 3 or 4 decades, where the academic culture is increasingly, I suppose, kind of post-national, liberal, multicultural, and views those things as not even political positions, but just the normal thing that sensible, educated people think. This is one of the frustrations, I'm sure you'll have come across it, with talking to people about politics, is that people often don't recognize that the view they're taking is contentious. So if you think of something like equality and diversity training, people find it hard to understand being opposed to it because they think, oh, it's just encouraging people to be nice. And why would you be against equality and diversity, without recognizing that equality and diversity kind of embeds a particular understanding of the world, a particular view of equality and of relations between people. So it's seen as the default rather than a political position. So I think, the difficulty is that institutions just are staffed by people who don't really have faith in what the institution originally set up to do, and also don't have faith in the possibility of a kind of non-political realm. So if you think of something like, there's been a lot of complaints recently about museums becoming, decolonializing their collections and that sort of thing. Now, if you say to someone, a curator at a museum, well, actually, museums, as far as possible, shouldn't actually be political. They should be about teaching people about particular things, informing the public about ancient Egypt or ancient China or British history or French history or Renaissance art, or whatever the subject of that museum is. And I don't think a lot of people who've been through British universities in the last few decades would accept that you can have that non-political space. I think that's one of the main problems we have, is that non-political spaces are shrinking because people don't accept the concept of a non-political space. If that makes sense.
It does make sense. and there's actually lots in there that I'd love to delve into a bit more. Let's focus on political spaces, though, because in the last week, we're recording last day of February 2025. In the last week, one of the news items has been on how there have been the switching around of certain artworks in the Houses of Parliament. And this has included the removal of figures like Lord Nelson, as well as other luminaries from British history, folks who have been the leaders of various war efforts that have secured the independence of the nation, fought great efforts to make sure that Britain keeps some level of primacy in the corner of the world in which it inhabited and beyond, and so has rightly been written into the record books. They have been replaced with pictures of people like Yvette Cooper, current Home Secretary, former Prime Minister Theresa May, and several other women or anyone from a parliamentary background who perhaps represents an ethnic minority background. We're talking very recent politicians who have now been put up in place of these national luminaries, as we talked about. And this created quite a lot of comment, not just on the right online. You had those who represent the old left, like Paul Embury, calling out how this just seems like a desecration of national history in some way, and a replacement and a rewriting of history. And I just wonder if that mindset, that worldview which you've just described, and those people who hold it, would have even flinched at the prospect of removing these artworks, which even, Prime Minister Starmer removed paintings of Churchill, Thatcher, found himself sitting alongside Donald Trump and J.D. Vance this week, saying, "Isn't it great that Churchill's back where he belongs in the Oval Office?" Almost the irony not lost on him, or perhaps it was. I just wonder, besides the neutral spaces shrinking, do you think that even the highly politicized acts taking place within the political spaces, that that doesn't raise eyebrows anymore?
Yeah, it's strange because to me, I don't understand how they are. I can't imagine being so impressed with myself that I put a portrait of myself up instead of someone like Nelson or Churchill. It's a very strange mindset to me. But I think as well, it's I mentioned earlier about the idea of the intelligentsia now almost being post-national and very wary of any kind of sort of patriotic or anything that's got patriotic connotations or feels like it's celebrating, the old Britain. So I think the reason that's happening is that there's a kind of year zero mentality, which is that Britain began at a pinch. Really, it began in 1948, with the founding of the NHS and the Empire Windrush. And old Britain is something that we emerged from. So in a sense, there's been an attempt, I think, almost to refound the country, if that doesn't sound too strange, and to make us, it's why you get, this talk of Britain being a nation of immigrants and these kind of obviously untrue statements about kind of historic British identity and the way things have worked historically. There's a very strong movement to kind of push those things to one side and to emphasize the, what they call British values now, or alleged British values, and to center not a distinct national history of a people in a place and of particular institutions, particular achievements that the British people have made, but to replace that with a kind of ideologically focused new world. So that's why, you know, Nelson and Churchill are out, because they represent that old world. And paintings of the first female chancellor or Yvette Cooper, they represent the new world of, I suppose, kind of universalist ideals of the rejection of the old pale, male, and stale, you know, Christian settlement. That their whole life and education and upbringing has encouraged them to reject that and look upon it as a kind of benighted past. So in a way, it's not surprising that they've got no kind of attachment to that past, because there's no reason why they would have, being raised in, you know, the post-60s world. I mentioned earlier about, I wrote a piece about Starmer last year, and I mentioned, I think, that he's the first prime minister who really strikes me as being a completely post-1960s person, in the sense that he has no kind of instinctive fondness or love of British institutions. You know, he's an unambiguously atheist. He's never shown any kind of interest in British history. There's a sense that he's one of the new men, if you like, who the big rupture in the 60s and 70s, and the ongoing rupture really, was designed to produce. That's not to say that he's necessarily communist, as some of the more excitable opponents say, but he's a product of the new world, if you like. So the old Britain of, you know, wood panelled rooms and oil paintings of great national figures, that means nothing to him and to the people around him.